Hi, everybody. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Tom Hirst today. First of all, hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, John. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. So first of all, get straight into it. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I've been freelancing as a web developer for the last 11 years. Straight out of university, I applied for a job as a web developer, didn't get it, and I just thought, I'm going to give freelancing a try. And 11 years later, here I am. Yeah, and I mean, at the minute, I'm kind of going through a bit of a career transition into authorship and writing books, as I'm sure we'll touch on later on. So yeah, it's all interesting stuff, and yeah, I'm enjoying the online life. I'm going to stick in it, and yeah, see where it goes.
Brilliant. And it's really interesting because I did see that actually on your Twitter feed, how you'd started straight out of university freelancing, which is probably quite rare, isn't it, I think, to say. So how did you find those early stages of transition to a freelancer then? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably the tougher route to take because obviously a lot of people, they'll start in agencies and then, all of a sudden just say, I'm going to try this freelance thing. And they've got that back catalogue of contacts and things like that, the work experience. Whereas I had none of that apart from, the projects that I'd worked on at uni. So yeah, looking back now, I can see it was probably the tougher route to take. But yeah, I just told everyone that I knew what skills I had basically. So the first client that I got was actually a contact of my dad's, who's an accountant. And I just said, look, Dad, I'm doing this WordPress thing. Tell if there's anybody you can tell about it, let them know. And yeah, someone mentioned it in a conversation with him that they needed a WordPress developer. He linked us up, and that's where it all began.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, it's so often, when I first started freelancing myself, it was somebody I knew who was the first, and actually the first few projects really. And I think that's quite common, isn't it? And I know through your site, you've sort of mentored other freelancers. Do you see that as a bit of a theme really, that to start out, you pick up from work people that you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think you underestimate how many people you already know that could use your services. And that's something that, when I'm mentoring other freelancers is what I say, don't discount those connections that you already have, because obviously, there'll be friends of family of friends, your extended network is probably a little bit bigger than what you already think. And that spans into your social media networks as well. Even if you've only got couple of hundred followers or something, don't discount telling them. Make yourself available for work. Make it obvious that you are freelancing, because that's where a lot of people fall down in the beginning. They don't let people actually know. They don't shout about it enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are a bit shy, aren't they, about promoting their own services, but no one else is going to do it for you, are they? So
exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of 11 years freelancing then, tell us a little bit about that journey, because obviously some people decide to maybe expand a little bit in terms of a smaller firm or an agency and things. Tell us about the 11 years and why you decided to stay sort of working exclusively by yourself as a freelancer, should I say?
Yeah, I think that it's probably because I'm a bit of a control freak. I don't really like relinquishing much control. And obviously when you've, built up a good level of credibility as a freelancer, you start to raise your prices and things like that. And I've never really felt comfortable with handing off large portions of work to other people, especially, in the last 3 or 4 years. And I do work with other freelancers who I trust and things like that. So I have expanded in that sense. But yeah, the agency route, it's never really been one that I've looked to go into. I mean, I'm not discounting it, because obviously as you get older and you make more connections and you're in the game longer, it's like the natural route of progression. But yeah, I mean, the authorship side of things, like, the company of one thing really appeals to me. So doing the freelancing alongside the products is, the avenue that I'm taking right now. So we'll see where that goes first.
Yeah. That's great, and let's get into that a little bit then, because I mentioned to you off air when we were talking earlier that's how I first came across yourself in terms of a Twitter thread that blew up around pricing freelance projects. So tell us a little bit about that and your shift towards this product-based model.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say about a couple of years ago now, like I did like the best year that I'd ever done freelance, and I looked back on it and like the money was good, but I thought I don't really want to work this hard for the rest of my life. And, I didn't really need to make any more than that ever. Like there was the goal of it, getting to this certain amount was, it was achieved, it was accomplished. And then I just thought, how can I start, making my road into like more passive income? So still doing the freelancing, but also, coming up with these products that'll sell while I sleep kind of thing. So yeah, that's where the mindset shift, started. It was that point.
And how do you find the actual sort of output side of that different? So obviously working on client projects and things where you're actually sort of working on your own product that you want to develop and stuff. How does that differ for you in terms of the actual working schedule that you do?
Yeah, so I mean, at the minute, I would say I'm running a bit of a 50-50 schedule. So I'm still doing the client work to pay the bills, but then I'm like going gradually more and more into, the product stuff and the marketing side. But I mean, yeah, the split at the minute in terms of the schedule, there's I'm doing a lot on Twitter, as you mentioned, with the thread and stuff. I made a conscious effort to start building an audience to deliver this knowledge, because number one, I like doing it, and number two, I always had in my mind that I would start doing the products. So yeah, I would say about 10, 11 months ago, I just started tweeting a few thoughts about freelancing, business, things like that. So yeah, that takes up a lot of my time as well, getting that content out there. But yeah, so the balance of it all is pretty nice, because it gives you a bit of perspective. So you're doing things like on the client side, and obviously like honing your skills still and honing the craft, but then you're teaching it as well at the same time. So you're right in the mix of it, so that it makes your information more better to the freelancers that you're teaching it to, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense. Share the sort of theory and the practical. You're literally living it, aren't you, as you educate people on how to run it.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
How do you find the motivation split then? Because obviously when you're working on a client project, you'll speak to them, there's a deadline and a project, and you're working for them. Whereas obviously the product side, primarily you're using your own, it's up to you, isn't it, really, in terms of when you work and what you do and everything. How does that differ for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I've never really been someone who needed a client on my back to get things done. I'm really driven and self-motivated. So that transition wasn't really a problem. I've always been really methodical and really structured. So yeah, I would say there's not really been that much difference in the transition on that side of things.
And then one of the areas we talk about in these interviews is focus. So finding flow and being able to get some output, which I imagine for what you do on both sides of the 50-50 split is really important. We obviously live in a world of distraction, and you might have clients emailing you and contacting you. How do you go about finding focus and being able to deliver a good output?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing for me is I actually wrote a blog post about this a couple of weeks ago. It's a system that I use called communication crowd control. So basically what I do is I limit the amount of communication that can get to me at certain times from certain people. So, it's like the typical stuff that you'll hear, like, notifications off, phone on do not disturb. I do all that at certain times, but I also like set expectations with the people that I'm collaborating with. So I let them know how I work best, and I ask them how they work best. And then we try and find a happy medium in between. So yeah, I think focus for me is, what I try and do is like split things down the middle. So say if I've got two things that I want to get done that day, I'll work in half day portions. So I'll say, look, half a day I'm going to be doing the authorship stuff. And then on the back end of the day, I'm going to be doing client work. And that is it. It's non-negotiable. For 4 hours here, I'm working on this. For 4 hours here, I'm working on that. And then I'll evaluate the outcomes of those portions, as opposed to, like tracking hours directly and stuff like that.
Right. Very interesting. And the other area I wanted to touch on was around, obviously a lot of people are having to get used to this shift to remote working and with what's going on with their businesses and things like that. So I imagine you've been doing an element of that for quite a period now. So is there any sort of tips and advice you find that will work best for people moving to remote working?
Yeah, dedicated office space, like in your house. If you're working from home, set up whether it's just the kitchen worktop or it's your own office, if you can. Just separate work from life, because I mean, it's becoming a bit cliche to say that now, but it's so true. You need to, when you're in work mode, you need to stay in work mode. And when you're in life mode, stay in life mode, because if you do things half-assed, basically, then you're not really giving either your all. And that's what I found in the early days. It's so easy to, let's say you're out for a meal with your wife or your friends or, your extended family, and then you can be checking your emails because you're a freelancer. So the more that you do, the more direct benefit you get, but it's counterproductive in the long run. because you just end up burning out and you lose all that level of separation. So yeah, getting that balance right is super key for remote workers.
I imagine you're speaking from experience there. Did that take you a while to adjust to that? Were you someone who did sort of check your emails all the time in your early days of freelancing? Or?
It's a constant battle, I would say. It's something that, you know, you never really completely cut out, even though you keep telling yourself that, you know, it's not the right thing to do. But when you're aware of it, that's the first step of the hurdle. Yeah. So it's definitely an ongoing journey for me.
And when you've got to that point where you maybe enhance the skill of doing that, trying to switch off, do you actually feel that improves your output when you are in sort of on work mode, if you like?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm quite, I'm not really good at multitasking. And I mean, I don't think anybody is really inherently. We might say that we can juggle a few things, but I think anyone that says that the multitasking is actually not giving that one thing their all. And I'm sure that the output's not as good as what it would be if you did, you know, have that focus on one thing at one time.
Great. And one of the other areas we talk about with our interviewees is goal setting. So you referenced earlier there about that revenue goal last year, which you hit. Tell us a little bit about your approach to goal setting. Are you somebody who sets quite strict goals over months, quarters, years, or how do you approach that for your organization?
Yeah, I mean, I try and do it in life and in business, I guess. And I don't really say I want X by then. I'll say, look, this would be a really nice thing to achieve, to work towards. Because I believe more in, you know, the day-to-day little wins and how they build up towards the goals. So while I think it's good to have a goal, I don't think that you should hold yourself accountable too harshly if you fail to get it. But obviously, if you don't get it, then, you know, look back and analyze why you didn't. So yeah, I set loose goals is what I would say.
Right. Okay. And then we alluded to this earlier around the Twitter thread that you had that kind of blew up. So I'd really like to explore this, and the book that's come off the back of it. We'll give it a little plug, and I'll pop the link in for you as well, because I think it's really interesting. And I made a lot of mistakes when I started freelancing in terms of pricing. It's really difficult to price yourself at the right level. So can you just summarize what the thread was about, and a little bit about, obviously we'll tease and hold some of it back so people have to go and download the full book, but what are some of the key challenges people do, and mistakes they make, should I say, in terms of their pricing as a freelancer when they start out?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with the thread. So like I said before, I've been sharing a lot on Twitter and building a bit of an audience around, you know, the freelancing stuff, you know, with a view to doing authorship eventually. And yeah, I just did this tweet. It was just an off-the-cuff Twitter thread about everything that I've learned about pricing over the last 11 years. And I think because it was so frank and to the point, because that's kind of my personality, but I think that came across in the tweet, and it's just like, boom, 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 boom. This is exactly what I've learned. And people just found it really valuable. I don't really think that there's been anything quite as cut and dried and frank and opinionated as what I put out. So it just took off. It's just a perfect storm, basically, because I've been tweeting a lot, in the last year or so, and this one just took off. It's I think it's got 37,000 likes, and it's had 3 million impressions, and it's just absolutely crazy. But it's been really good because I've managed to reach freelancers that have been getting in touch saying, this is I can't tell. I probably don't realize how valuable it was to them. You know, I just thought that it was just another tweet. But yeah, I've met some really cool people, you know, off the back of that. So yeah, it was great. And what was the second part of the question again?
So in terms of the book itself then, so can you just give us some of those, sort of summarize a little bit what are the challenges and some of the advice you give in the book?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, in the book, basically I break down, because I've used every single pricing methodology that you can think of in freelancing. So I break down all the pros and cons of those, you know, from my vantage point. But yeah, the underlying mantra, I guess, of how I price is that you should have an eye on value at all times, no matter what pricing, you know, methodology that you're using. So, you know, focus on the value that you provide to your clients as opposed to the labor that you give them. And, you know, that's the whole thing that I'm trying to teach through the book, is how freelancers can understand their true worth and get paid in line with that, rather than just working, you know, constantly for hourly rates for years on end.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I've lived the mistakes of that as well. And going back to what you said earlier there around the value, you almost didn't realize the value of the information that you had to all these people. And I think it goes back to your earlier point, doesn't it, about saying when people first start out that they don't sort of push it, is that, 11 years of experience and the success that you've kind of seen, as you say, as you've grown over. For these people that are starting out, like, there's so many valuable insights someone with that experience can give, isn't there, in terms of, so they don't have to make those mistakes, because we've been through them, I suppose. And yourself, do you see the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I try and share the information that I would have wanted when I started. And I think a lot of people say that's what they do, but it's so true, because you will always have someone that's, earlier on in their career, and you'll always have someone that's in front of you as well. So, it's like a feedback loop of like information. So all the freelancers that are in front of you, you can learn from them, and then it's up to you to then pass that down. And I'm a big believer, in sharing is caring, and, lifting others up. And when you start rooting for other people, people start rooting for you as well. So yeah, that's my whole ethos, really.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that mindset, and seeing people. For me, I get a real buzz off seeing people do well, and speaking to yourself and hearing the success is brilliant. And the fact that you can now share that, and I think it's quite. I don't know what. I'm a bit of a Twitter fan as well, so it's interesting to see you chose that platform. That if you curate your timeline, how do you find that you can really learn some great stuff off the platform? Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think Twitter for me is it's like there's so many like smart minds on Twitter that I can't follow them all. I have to like stop myself from following people because the information overload would be too much. But yeah, I think it's such a great tool for people who want to, advance their careers, learn about business, marketing, web development, design. There's so many smart minds sharing free value out there. Yeah, Twitter it's such a strong platform right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I didn't want to let you go without talking a little bit about kind of specifically what you do in terms of web design and the career that you've built in that. So where do you see web design now, and what do you see of the future of web design?
Yeah, so I mean, my career's been focused on development, so I'm a programmer rather than a designer. But in terms of the web sphere at the minute, my background's in WordPress, so I've always specialised in doing WordPress websites, mainly custom development, plugins, custom themes, and working with designers, UX, UI designers, to come up with websites that convert essentially. But yeah, I think that the future, and this is probably what I'm going to end up exploring a bit more on this side of my career, is headless CMSs and JavaScript front ends, which are highly performant. So yeah, I mean, have you heard of a term called the content mesh?
No, I haven't come across that. No.
So it's essentially where you would it's a term that a company called Gatsby coined basically, and it's basically where you're going to get all different CMSs coming together, but being presented in one front end. So say you've got WordPress as your blog, Shopify is your e-commerce platform, but presenting it all as one on the front end. So yeah, that's where I think the future of web development and design is going.
Oh, really interesting. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be some people in our audience who work in your space. So that's really interesting for them to hear. And I'm sure they'll follow you to keep up to date on what you're going to be publishing on that. Excuse my terminology on web design.
No.
It probably frustrates you that, but when I mean that, I'm sort of design and development, I suppose, as one, encompassing the two a bit. But
no worries.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. It's been an absolute pleasure, Tom. Really interesting to hear from you. And thanks so much for sharing your story. Congrats on the success of the book, and obviously your career as a whole, really. And I'm sure everyone will put your details to follow you and keep up to date with what you're going to be publishing in the near future. So thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. It's been great.